احنا last time we stopped here. احنا وقفنا عند الالveolar capillary exchange. We've done it. And today, inshallah, we're going to discuss something very important about the heart, which is how the heartbeat is controlled, or how the rate of the heart is controlled. Do you have any ideas how many times per minute the heart muscles contract?
Around 70.
Around 70, yes, this is the average. Very good. So it is from 60 to 90 beats per minute. So it is acceptable to have a heart rate that is 60. This is the lowest normal, the low normal of the range. And this is the high normal of the range. And in between them, of course, all values are acceptable. When you are sleeping, for example, then your heart rate will slow down and maybe go towards the 60. And when you are angry or when you are anxious, then this will rise maybe to reach 90. But the usual is, it is between 70 and 80, like in all this is acceptable. Of course, when you're sleeping, for example, or when you are relaxed, the heart rate diminishes because there is what we call the parasympathetic system that is overriding. Have you ever heard about the parasympathetic system or the parasympathetic nerves?
لا بس ممكن بالبريفكس والسفكس كده نفهم.
بالprefix والsuffix؟ طيب هنفهم ايه بقى؟
بارا يعني حاجة ضد.
طيب have you ever heard about، هو ياسين انت قافل الكاميرا ليه؟ معلش please turn it on. Have you ever heard about the autonomic nervous system? Thank you, Yasin. Have you ever heard about the autonomic nervous system?
Autonomic?
Yes. The autonomic nervous system is that part of the nervous system that is not under control, that is involuntary. All the nerves in the human body that are not under your control are belonging to what we call the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system is divided into two subdivisions: the sympathetic fibers that act during excitement, like fear, like fright, like fight. Fear and fright are the same. Like flight, when you are on a plane, for example, there are people who have panic attacks when they are on planes, then it is the sympathetic system that is acting. But on the other hand, there are fibers or nerve fibers that belong to the parasympathetic part of the nervous system, and they act mainly during sleep, when you are relaxed, and during digestion, meaning that all the secretions, all the glands, the exocrine glands of the digestive system secrete and produce their secretions and release their secretions into the alimentary canal under control of the parasympathetic system. This introduction was important because we are going to talk about how the heartbeats are regulated. But before studying how the heartbeats are regulated, we have to study first how the heartbeats are produced. Now, in order for any muscle in the human body to contract, the muscle should receive first a nerve impulse, an order from the brain, and then the motor nerves. So there should be an electric impulse that travels along a motor nerve. And when that electric impulse reaches the muscle will react by contracting. So for example, for our voluntary muscles like the biceps muscle or the triceps muscle, you give voluntary orders. Your brain sends orders along motor nerves to the biceps, and you give it an order to contract. If you're not willing to move your arm, then you're not going to send motor impulses, and the biceps muscle will not contract. These are voluntary orders, voluntary motor orders. But the general rule is the same. A muscle cannot contract unless it receives an electric impulse. But there are exceptions to this. The exception is the cardiac muscle, and in particular, a part of the cardiac muscle that is located in the posterior wall of the right atrium and that regulates the whole process of heart contracting, and that is called the sinoatrial node. The sinoatrial node, it's a very famous location in the heart, and we abbreviate it SA node. So what is the SA node? The SA node is actually a part of the myocardium, but it is characterized by, of course, it is made up of cardiac muscle fibers, of cardiac muscle cells, but it is characterized by being formed of specialized muscles. Those specialized muscles can contract without receiving electric impulses from any external innervation. So how are they special? How are they adapted to their function? They're special because they can contract without any extrinsic, and by extrinsic here we mean external, any extrinsic innervation. So even if the heart, if you disconnect the heart or you disconnect the heart from the nerves in surgery, for example, and you remove it from the human body, but provided that you put it in a saline solution, in an isotonic sodium chloride solution that has the same concentration as that of the plasma, then the heart will keep contracting. And this simply means that the cardiac muscles do not need any external innervation or any extrinsic innervation to contract. But this part of the cardiac muscle that has this property is the sinoatrial node. So all the heart rate will depend on the rate of the sinoatrial node, meaning that if the sinoatrial node contracts, if your particular sinoatrial node contracts, for example, at a rate like my set, for example, at 70 beats per minute, then the whole heart will contract at 70 beats per minute. So it will drive, the sinoatrial node will drive the whole heart. And we'll be talking about the sinoatrial node in detail, but I meant to mention this in order for you to understand how the heartbeats are driven. So the sinoatrial node will drive the whole heart to contract at the same rate. To contract at the same rate. If the sinoatrial node changes its rate, then the whole heart will change its rate. That's why we call the sinoatrial node the pacemaker of the heart. This is very important. The pacemaker of the heart. It determines the pace of the heart. It determines the rate of the heart. The pacemaker is like when you have a row, for example, or a queue of soldiers. The first one, if the first one has a certain pace or rate at which it walks, then the whole line or the whole queue will walk at the same rate. So the term has been driven from there. So the SA node is considered the pacemaker of the heart because it drives the whole heart to contract at the same rate as it does. Okay? So how does the sinoatrial node contract without any extrinsic innervation? This is because the sinoatrial node has a very unstable membrane potential. And I'll tell you what this means. So the sinoatrial node has a very unstable membrane potential. What does this mean? I'll open a new screen, but first I'll erase the what's here. Okay, and we open a new screen. So say, for example, that this is one myocardial cell, actually. Say, this is, that cardiac muscles are cylindrical. They are branched, yes, but I'll draw them in a simplified way. Suppose that this is one cardiac muscle lying in the region of the SA node. Usually in all cells in the body, and in particular in nerve cells and in cardiac cells, there is a difference in electric potential across the cell membrane. This is the cell membrane of the cardiac muscle. We call it the sarco. Sarco means muscle. Sarcolemma, and lemma refers to the membrane. So this is the cell membrane, and you will find that the net charge on the outside of the sarcolemma is positive, and that the inside is negative. So the net charge, what do I mean by net? Meaning that you might have positive and negative charge outside, but the resultant is positive. And you might have positive and negative charge inside the cell, but the net is negative. And of course, as you know from your study of physics, since the outside is positive and the inside is negative, then we have a potential difference that allows electricity to flow between the positive and negative sides. We call this the membrane potential. The membrane potential. This is important for your study of the nervous system, of course, but it is also important to mention it here. How much is the membrane potential? What's the value of that membrane potential? It is about 70 millivolts. Of course, it's a very small value because we're talking about electricity inside the human body. And you always put a negative sign outside. Why do we put a negative sign outside? Because this negative sign will refer to the negativity, the net negativity that is present inside the myocardial muscle. So this status that you see, or this diagram that you see, is what happens in, or what is seen in the sinoatrial node under resting condition, when the sinoatrial node is resting. So this is the resting condition of the sinoatrial node, and we describe this status of having a potential difference across the cell membrane as the polarized state. So this state of positivity outside and negativity inside, we call it a polarized state. Polarized state, okay? And then all of a sudden, the normal in any other muscle cell that is not the sinoatrial node, that when you receive an electric impulse, what happens is that all this will be reversed. All this will be reversed. So upon receiving an order, I'm talking now about any muscle, I'm not talking about the sinoatrial node in particular, all this will be reversed, meaning what? That the outside of the membrane will be negative and the inside will be positive. How does this occur? This will occur through inflow of sodium ions and through other factors that you shouldn't bother yourself reflecting on them now. So this is no more a resting muscle. This is a stimulated muscle. This is an excited or a stimulated muscle, an excited or a stimulated muscle. And if we called the resting state a polarized state, this excited state, which shows exactly the opposite, will be called depolarization or the depolarized state. Depolarization or the depolarized state. Any question?
لا احنا فهمنا كده، ده كده الساينو اتريال نود اللي بيحصل جواه.
دلوقتي اللي انا قلته ده اللي بيحصل في اي مصل عاديه، انه عشان تتحول من البولرايزد ستيت الى الديبولارايزد ستيت لازم يجي لها هنا اوردر، لازم يجي لها الكتريك امبولس. بس في
عشان تكون
sorry.
انت كونتراكت يعني.
لا احنا لسه مش يعني احنا بس الاول لازم يحصل depolarization. بعد الديبولاريزيشن بقى كويس انك فكرتني، هيحصل ايه يا ياسين؟ هيحصل contraction. يبقى لازم المصل تبقى depolarized عشان يحصل لها بعد كده ايه؟ contraction. تمام. لكن في الساينو يبقى الحاجه اللي هتخلينا نوصل للكونتراكشن هو اننا نوصل للديبولاريزيشن. تمام، موافقين على كده؟
منطقي.
يبقى if no depolarization يبقى no contraction. يعني الأهم في الموضوع إيه؟ إن أنا يوصل لي electric impulse ولا إن أنا أبقى depolarized؟
ما هو ده بيحصل قبل ده.
أيوه، بس إيه الأهم يعني؟ مين اللي إذا حصل لازم هيحصل contraction؟
إن هو يبقى depolarized.
Very good, excellent. Depolarization. طب why am I asking this weird question? لأنه في certain muscles that do not need arrival of an electric impulse for them to depolarize. They can depolarize on their own وبالتالي they can contract on their own. في الحالة دي يبقى هم بيتحولوا من البولاريزيشن للديبولاريزيشن والcontraction on their own. يبقوا دولت نقدر نوصفهم ان هم they are stable muscle cells ولا unstable muscle cells.
stable.
ما سمعتش stable ولا unstable؟
stable.
لا they're not. يعني انت لما تقوم لوحدك كده من غير ما حد يضايقك تقوم قايم مزعق في البيت كله من غير ما حد يضايقك ولا يجي ناحيتك، يبقى انت stable ولا unstable؟
لا هو انا كده مش هبقى stable طبعا، بس قصدك في
بالظبط
الحاله
كده.
بتاعت
فنفس الحكايه بالنسبه للماسل سيل، الطبيعي ان الماسل سيل ما تبقاش excited وما تبقاش depolarized الا لو وصل لها نيرف امبلس. فلو هي حضرتها من نفسها من غير ما يوصل لها نيرف امبلس بقت stimulated وبقت excited وعملت contraction من تلقاء نفسها من غير ما حد يبعت لها order، يبقى دي تعتبر unstable. في الواقع مش الماسل هي اللي unstable، وانما هي الممبرين بوتنشال بتاعتها هي الانستيبل. الساركولاما بتاعتها هي الانستيبل، بتفتح الشانلز للصوديوم لوحدها من نفسها من غير ما حد يقول لها وتدخل الصوديوم وتوصل للديبولاريزيشن ستيت. فبما انه الساينو اتريال نود has unstable membrane potential unstable membrane potential يبقى هي it can depolarize on its own على طول، مش مستنية لما يجي لها extrinsic innervation. So on its own it can undergo depolarization and contraction. بس طبعا هي مش بتعمل ده in an unregulated fashion، هي بتعمل ده with a regulated fashion، وبالتالي it beats regularly at a rate of 60 to 90 beats per minute. And this is what we call بالمرة بقى، الكلام ده هيفيدنا جدا لما نيجي ندرس ال ECG إن شاء الله. بالتالي إحنا we call this regular beating we call it the sinus rhythm. يعني ان الهارت ماشي مظبوط، ماشي تبع الريجولار sinus rhythm، لانه صحيح الساينو atrial node has an unstable membrane potential، لكن هي في نفس الوقت الليدر، هي pacemaker of the heart. فاحنا كل المسلز الثانيه in the heart have to follow the sino atrial node's rate. Have you understood this entity?
yes.
الانترودكشن دي مش موجودة طبعا على السلايد الأولاني، بس هي موجودة later on، بس الأحسن نفهمها الأول قبل ما بدل ما نقرا السلايد كده وإحنا مش فاهمين، لأنها تفيدنا بعد كده later on. بالمرة بقى نقول حاجة مهمة اللي هي عمرو دخل. بالمرة بقى نقول حاجة مهمة اللي هو إيه؟ طب هو هي ساينو اتريال نود بس هي اللي عندها الانستيبل membrane potential دي، وهي اللي بتبيت regularly at 60 to 90 beats per minute. اشمعنى هي يعني؟ طب ما في حاجة تانية هنا another part of the myocardium موجودة بين الاتريا وبين الventricles، عشان كده بنسميها the atrioventricular node or the AV node. هي كمان عندها unstable membrane potential، وهي كمان تقدر تعمل depolarization on its own would fire electric impulses on its own, would contract بعد كده on its own. Why isn't it the pacemaker of the heart? لأنه simply the AV node beats صحيح spontaneously بس at a slower rate. At a slower rate. وبالتالي it is overridden by the sinoatrial node. It is overridden by the SA node. فإذا كنت يا AV node نفسك تكوني البيس ميكر of the heart كان المفروض إن أنت you beat at a higher rate. طبعا الموضوع مش بيمشي كده haphazardly. This is something controlled. This is something Allah created that is very highly regulated. But I'm just telling you that there are other parts of the myocardium that can fire electric impulses on their own, that can, actually they don't fire electric impulses, but they depolarize on their own. And when they depolarize, they contract on their own, but at slower rate. وبالتالي the pacemaker, the SA node, has been labeled or selected as being the pacemaker of the heart that regulates the heart rate. آخر حاجة بقى نقولها في موضوع ال SA node ده عشان نخلص منها. طب احنا قلنا إنه the SA node can beat spontaneously without any extrinsic innervation. هي لوحدها لأن عندها unstable electric membrane potential. طيب هو امال لازمة ايه التو nerves اللي بيروحوا لها ده؟ لما ندرس ان شاء الله الاناتومي of the heart وندرس النيرفس system هنعرف انه the heart is supplied by two nerves, and in particular the sinoatrial node receives اللي احنا لسه كنا بنتكلم عنه the two nerves that belong to the involuntary autonomic nervous system. So it receives a sympathetic innervation and it receives a parasympathetic innervation. And as we said, the sympathetic will work whenever you're stressed, whenever you panic, whenever you are on a plane, whenever you have increased adrenergic stimulation in your body under stress conditions in general. And the parasympathetic will be released whenever you are relaxing or whenever you want to secrete or produce digestive juices. So what's the importance of these two nerves if the sinoatrial node can generate or can depolarize on its own and can contract on its own? What do you think they are? Why do you think they are here? The sympathetic and the parasympathetic innervation. Can you guess? Hi عمرو ازيك؟ الحمد لله على السلامة.
الله يسلم حضرتك.
عمرو احنا we are recording the session.
thank you.
فالبروتاتك ان شاء الله you will be and I'll be trying to record all the coming sessions ان شاء الله.
Allah, thank you so much.
You're welcome. سلامتك.
الله يسلم حضرتك.
Can you guess, guys, why do we have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic innervation? If the SA node can do this on its own, you don't? You can't?
انا كنت اقول عشان at times مثلا when you're asleep ان البرين بتاعك مش يعني مش functioning.
لا هو
صح؟
مفيش حاجة اسمها the brain بتاعك is non-functioning. احنا we
أصلاً.
consume energy even when we are sleeping because both the brain and the heart are working during sleep. هو ممكن البرين يغير الاكتيفيتي بتاعته during sleep. لو في وقت ان شاء الله ناخد nervous system هنعرف ده انه the pattern of the electrical activity of the brain will change during sleep. لكن it's still working. يعني بدليل ان انت you can dream مثلا during sleep. This is يعني a manifestation of your brain being working, and the heart never stops. Do you think that when you go to sleep your heart takes a break?
لا طبعا.
أكيد لا. طيب يعني إذا كان الهارت doesn't stop أنت عايز البرين stops. البرين أهم من الهارت لأنه if the brain does not send signals to the respiratory system يبقى خلاص to the cardiovascular اسمه إيه ده اللي هو in the medulla oblongata اللي إحنا in the lowermost part of the brain there is what we call the cardiorespiratory center. The cardiorespiratory center ده بيreceive impulses من أو بيsend impulses للهارت وبيsend impulses to the lungs. فبالتالي if the brain stops working and the cardiorespiratory center is stopping, then the heart wouldn't beat and the lungs wouldn't breathe. هتقولوا لي طب ما هو الهارت عنده its own rate. تمام. بس أصلا the lungs would not يعني the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles will not work. الصيام طبعا آخر اليوم مأثر عليه. It's not the lungs. They are the muscles of breathing, the breathing muscles. The breathing muscles. فاeven if the heart is contracting without innervation لكن the muscles are not working. فايه قيمة ان the heart sends blood to the lungs while the lungs are not doing any movement because the muscles of breathing have stopped. طيب هو anyways ياسين قول. What's the
ما
importance
فيش غير
of the
ممكن يكون مثلا
sympathetic؟ طيب عشان
ريت
بس الوقت
ريت
يعني
مثلا. اتفضلي.
لا اتفضل انت. ها What's the
اقول
importance
ماشي.
of extrinsic innervation؟
هو فاضل حاجتين، يا اما ريت، يعني بتخدم في الريت ان هي مثلا في
Yes, very
فاستر
good.
مثلا.
Yes, very good. The extrinsic innervation controls the intrinsic rate of the S node. هي عندها its own intrinsic rate اللي هي ماشية بيه مع نفسها كده. Its own intrinsic rate. So it controls the intrinsic rate of the S node. فمثلا لو كان الintrinsic rate يعني لوحده of the S node is 70 مثلا، يبقى الباراسيمباثيك system لو اشتغل ممكن يوصله 60 والsympathetic system لو اشتغل ممكن يوصله 80 لأن الباراسيمباثيك always diminishes the heart rate and the sympathetic always increases the heart rate. يبقى the role of the extrinsic innervation is mainly to monitor or to regulate or to control the intrinsic rate of the sinoatrial node. تمام؟ When the sinoatrial node that lies at the posterior wall of the right atrium starts to contract and depolarizes, it will cause depolarization of the surrounding atrial muscles. So the contraction of the SA node will be followed by contraction of all the atrial muscles. So the depolarization of the SA node will spread to the surrounding atrial muscles. So here it's the first time we talk about spread of depolarization, meaning that when we have a cardiac muscle like this that has been depolarized, meaning that the outside is negative and the inside is positive, then it will induce the neighboring muscles to depolarize as well. So this will be a wave of depolarization that will spread from one atrial muscle to the other, okay? And then afterward, we will reach here the AV node, and the AV node will transmit this to the ventricular muscles, as we will see later on. So the control of heartbeats, Amal, can you read the slide, please?
Yes, sure. Control of heartbeats. The heart consists of muscle cells that contract in waves. When the first group of cardiac muscle cells in the atria are electrically stimulated, they respond by contracting, stimulate neighboring cells to contract, and so on. This continues until all the myocardial cells contract. The wave of activity then spreads to the ventricles to stimulate them to contract. The rhythmic cycle is then repeated. This is repeated about 60 to 90 times a minute.
Thank you so much. طبعا احنا we said much more information, but all the information we said will be encountered on the next slides, inshallah. So the sinoatrial node, Yasin?
يلا بينا. The sinoatrial node is a group of specialized cardiac muscle cells located in the right atrium. They are the first group of heart muscle cells that get stimulated. The sinoatrial node is called the pacemaker because its muscle cells spontaneously initiate their own electrical impulse and contract at their own rate, thus regulating the rate of contraction of the whole heart. When the whole myocardium follows the pace of the sinoatrial node, then the heart rhythm is called normal sinus rhythm, اللي هو من 60 ل 90
Yes, very good.
BPM.
Here we have to mention that it spontaneously initiates its own electric impulses because it has an important property that we mentioned. Do you remember it? What's the important property we said about the sinoatrial node that makes it capable of spontaneously initiating its electric impulse or actually yes?
Unstable potential.
Yes, very good. Unstable membrane potential. Plus half يا ياسين. Unstable membrane potential. طيب they spontaneously initiate their own electric impulses because they become, or this means that they become depolarized, because we talked about depolarization. And becoming depolarized, meaning that the outside of the cell, of the cardiac muscle cell, will be negative, whereas the inside of the cardiac muscle cell will be positive. Okay? Now, the AV node. We have talked briefly about the AV node, and we said that we have here the main pacemaker of the heart, which is the SA node, and that here, this is the interventricular septum, which is also made of cardiac muscles, and at the top, we have here the atrioventricular node that lies at the junction of the atria and ventricles. Of course, when the wave of depolarization spreads from the sinoatrial node to all the muscles of the atria, it will finally reach the AV node. And the main function of the AV node is to transmit this wave of depolarization, transmit the electric impulse. Let's say it, let's call it the electric impulse. So it transmits impulses, but in between brackets, you know that impulses here means waves of depolarization. So actually it's not depolarization, but waves of depolarization, because an electric impulse is a train of electric discharge. So we can replace impulses by waves of depolarization. So it transmits impulses or waves of depolarization from the atria to the ventricles, from the atria to the ventricles. This is the first important function of the atrioventricular node. But meanwhile, while it is transmitting the electric impulses, it causes a delay. So it like lowers the speed of the electric impulses. So it has a delay. Why do you think that it has a delay? But before asking you why there is a delay, and by delay here, I mean slowing down of the electric impulses. Why does it have a delay? But before this, I should tell you that transmit here, you can replace it by relays. So we have a relay and a delay. So the main function of the atrioventricular node is two things. Number one, to relay the electric impulse, and number two, to delay the electric impulse. How can the AV node, according to what I've explained at the beginning of the session, cause delay of the transmission of the electric impulse? What in the characteristics of the AV node allows it to do this?
It beats at a low rate.
Excellent, very good. كده +1 ياسين. So the AV node, احنا قلنا انه the AV node, just like the SA node, has the ability to fire spontaneously. So it fires spontaneously, just like the SA node does, because it has an unstable membrane potential, but at a lower rate. And this means that it will not be capable of transmitting the impulse at the same high rate of the sinoatrial node. But does this mean that the ventricles will be beating at a lower rate than the atria? No. When I say it delays the electric impulse, say for example that you are, say for example that there are 20 students that want to enter the class. 20 students that want to enter the classroom, okay? And they're coming at a very rapid speed. They're running and they're trying to enter the classroom running. So if I stand here and regulate their entry in the classroom so that they enter one by one, am I preventing any of them from reaching the classroom? No, I'm just allowing all of them, but at a slower rate. So the same applies to the AV node. So if the SA node beats at 70 beats per minute, and therefore the atria will contract at a rate of 70 beats per minute, then all those beats, the 70 per minute, will reach the ventricle per minute again, but with a delay. Yani they will not reach it on the spot. They will reach it after a fraction of a second. So what we mean by delay here is not that we're going to exclude some of the beats, that we're going to lower down the pace so that the ventricles beat at a lower rate. No, the atria and the ventricles will be beating at the same rate, but the fact is